It's absolutely my pleasure and delight to be here today, not only because I'm back at Columbia in some context, but frankly, I get to come with some of the greatest executives in the Vista portfolio and a few of my partners in the Vista portfolio who are going to speak after this. You know, the thing that you all have to realize is this is all about talent. This next set of challenges in our economy are all about who has the smartest people tackling these problems. And unfortunately, for so long, people have ignored half the population. We don't at Vista. And part of what we do, I think better than anyone else, is identify the smartest people on the planet, put them in positions where they can actually excel and grow and create massive amounts of, frankly, capital growth for our LPs and for us. And I have the distinct pleasure today to actually be on the stage with two of those wonderful executives. The first I'm going to bring up is Teresa Mackintosh. Teresa, please come up. And Teresa, just so you all know, did not start in the world of technology. She actually started as an accountant. And she has delivered with one of our companies, Trintech, almost a 3 times return, and she is so good, we decided to keep a quarter of the company for ourselves for this next turn. And so part of one of the reasons why I love her, she's made me money already, so thank you. And she's going to make more, and I fully expect that particular transaction to return over 4 times our money, which, just so you all know who in the private equity world, is in the top 0.1% returns. So Teresa, thank you for joining us. Our next guest is Chris Nimsger. Now, I've got the distinct pleasure of now working with Chris twice. And what many of you don't know is in her first iteration with us running one of our companies, Trintech, she delivered 7.7 times MOIC, cash on cash returns in that deal. I know. It's like, yeah, just short of 8. So anyway, she's working harder on this next one. And we've asked her to come back and work in one of our wonderful companies, Social Solutions. And she is the CEO of Social Solutions. And like many of our CEOs in this context, actually did not start off in the world of technology, actually started as a lawyer. And so what I've asked these two to do, and we're going to start with you, Chris, so please have a seat, is first talk about your journey. Let's talk about how you got here. You're going through college, going through law school, and talk about some of the pivotal moments that brought you on your path to now becoming a CEO for not only the second Vista company, but leading the 4th organization in your storied career. So, Chris, please.
Hey, thank you, Robert. Thanks for everything, all the support before today, of course, and today. Good morning, everybody. It's been a wild journey. I was ruminating on it a little bit last night, thinking about what we were going to talk about this morning. And yeah, I did start in the practice of law, which I thought would be fun. As it turns out, it's sitting in your office with books and paper, and 98% of the time. And so, I was enjoying that, but it was not all that exciting. I had lunch one day, completely coincidentally, with a friend of mine from law school who was the general counsel of a little tech company that was doing data recovery. And he was just telling me a story about how BP and Amoco had just merged. And instead of printing all their documents and giving them to the SEC as part of the transaction, they wanted to keep them all electronic. And how the company had been paid $1 million to figure out how to keep the email electronic. This is going to sound obvious now, but this was 1999, and produce it to the government. And I'm like, that sounds fun. Can I meet with you? I just want to hear what we did. Yeah. And so I went and met with them, and I asked them if I could join the business. Completely had no business background, law background. I was an English major. I joined the business, and I was like, hey, I was a lawyer. I know what the software should do. And so I went and sat with the developers, and I literally, the proverbial napkin, I drew it. I'm like, and here's what it should do, and wouldn't it be cool if it did this? And then they built 1.0, and they were doing a demo for me, and he said, next time, you need to write requirements. Right. I'm like, what's a requirement?
What's a requirement? So here we are. She's never written one line of code in your life.
No, well, I took Fortran or something in college.
Right. Anyway, yeah. Pascal. But yet you're now designing exactly a workflow and a product. Talk a little bit, and we'll keep on your journey, and then I'm going to come back to that question.
I just took an immersion approach, right? I was going to sit with every single person in the business and learn what it meant to be in tech. I literally sat with the developers, sat with people in support, which is something I still do. I was on my first day in the job. But not long after that, the business was starting to grow. We'd done $3 million in the first year, and they were looking for a GM to run the business. And so I went to the CEO and I said, I want to run it. I know I'm helping you build the software, but I want to run the business. And he said, well, we'll think about it. We'll talk to the board because it's a big investment. And they came back and said, Chris, you've done a great job, but you don't have an MBA. And so, I'm sorry, but we're going to run a search, and we want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I said, cool. Why don't you let me do it for free until you find someone?
Yeah.
It'll take you 60, 90 days anyway. Just let me do the job.
Yeah.
I'll sit here in my cube and do it, which is what I did. Let me just be the GM until you hire someone. And 45 days later, they came back and said, we're stopping the search. We want you to do it.
I love it. I love it. Great. Well done.
And
well
so
done.
that was
That's
for
a great
sure
story.
a huge pivotal moment in my career.
Yeah, it is.
And so, I tell my kids all the time, the world conspires to close doors every single day. And my job for them, and then their jobs for themselves, is to open as many as possible and walk through them fast. And so I tell that to my kids all the time, and that's definitely been my philosophy, is to walk through the open doors.
Love it. Great. Teresa, tell us a little bit about your journey and talk about, how you decided to go from accounting to become a CEO. What got you to that point?
Yeah, so actually a lot of similarities with Chris and I. So growing up, my dad was the county sheriff. He had 5 daughters and a son, and it's relevant because it's really kind of how I approach leadership.
Because you
and how
didn't
I
get to
approach a lot
date
of those
because
things,
dad's
right?
like running around. Yeah, I get it. I've got a father.
I didn't have a lot of dates.
Yeah,
You had
I
to
bet.
be really serious, right, to want to date the sheriff's daughter. But it really, going through college, I actually thought I was going to go into law, but of course I wanted to be, a prosecuting attorney because that was like basically the family business. And then I realized that it was nothing like it was going to be on TV, and so I ended up, really going kind of the accounting route, because with 6 kids, one thing was really clear is we were all thankful to have a college degree, but 4 years was all we were going to get out of our parents.
Yeah.
And so, anything past that, we had to be prepared to pay for ourselves. And so I was very focused on being employable after 4 years of undergrad. And one of the best ways was going into accounting in the early 90s. And I never really thought that I was going to be a CPA forever. That was never, I would say, the goal. But I always knew that understanding the numbers means you can understand the business. And I would say I'm entirely thankful that I did that and still use that skill set today, although I shouldn't sign any documents because now I only know enough to be dangerous. And really the crossover point for me, so I had gone to work for Pricewaterhouse when it was still Pricewaterhouse. I just dated myself. And I was in tax because I loved the tax, and it was kind of close to law and things like that. And it was September 15th, which was the corporate deadline for filing. I was working on a very large corporation, and the software failed. And then when the software failed, so I used to bribe my office mate to go to lunch early so that I could start things on her computer
Right, get
while
the
mine
computer
was
time.
still,
That's
right?
exactly right.
Because
Some of you youngsters don't understand. We used to have to fight for computer time.
Yeah, and so I'd be like, Betty, why don't you, take off? I gotta get this processing again, because the one I have processing over there, I realize I've already made a mistake in. So I need to get the second
recompile
one
it.
going
Yep,
in time
yep.
for this to file. And so, it was just a massive meltdown, and my partner was meeting for the signature for golf at 2, and it was one of those, you go screaming in there at 1:50 going, here's all the documents. So kind of classic. And so after that, I was like, what, there has to be a better way. I'm interested in improving the process, and there has to be a better way. And so I actually went to work for a small software company in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that subsequently was bought by Thomson Reuters, and they developed tax software. And so I joined as a tax analyst, which is essentially a business analyst, so in development, and that's really where I crossed over. So when you're developing tax software, which is still their main business, you're working with 22, 23-year-olds that haven't filed their own tax return yet,
Right.
and they're trying to program these systems to really be able to take care of the most complex situations on the globe. And so you really learn how to communicate. You learn how to write good requirements and things like that. And so that's really when I switched over to tech, if you will. And that's over 20 years ago.
Now, when you're making the leap to the executive ranks, when did you realize, okay, I really want to run a software company. I really want to run a tech business. Tell us a little bit about that and how you went through that in your mind and the pathway that got you there.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think, growing up, I, again, was in mid-Michigan, so a lot of small towns, and, I did very well, but it was a small pond, right? And so I think I always had a chip on my shoulder that there had to be a lot of people that were smarter, better, that they should be running the company a little bit. And you sort of get a sense of you need to work harder to get ahead of all those people. And I remember just looking around one day going, you know what, they're not that smart. Like, they're kind of basic white guys, right? No, it's not like, that's awesome. They're no smarter, they're no better. And so you realize.
Glenn and I talked about that. Not a whole lot special about the basic white guy, right? Yeah, we talked about that, yeah.
My daughter calls them BWGs. Basic white guys. Which is sort of funny to me. So you kind of look around and go, well, I'm as good as any of them, you know, and so constantly I was putting myself in the situation of taking on more, you know, getting out of my comfort zone and taking on new roles. And so I went from, you know, development, I started the product management function, I did mergers and acquisitions, I, you know, did marketing until, you know, you're in charge of a P&L, and you kind of go through that route. And really, I was only looking at the next job, probably in a lot of those cases. And a lot of times, I was getting a job that didn't exist the time before I had it. Like, I was saying, hey, I can do this. You know, at one point.
That's part of the joy in being in software and tech, too.
Yeah.
We still are forging new ground every day.
Every day.
And we're going to talk a little bit about how we're bringing AI and ML into each of your businesses, but that's part of the advantage of being in these new emerging industries. You know, this industry is only 40, 50 years old, really, commercialized in the last 35. And so bringing innovation of thought and a desire to make something happen differently is, frankly, one of the best catalysts to actually excelling in your career. But
Absolutely.
what about taking the risk, leaving something that was secure that you knew? How did you deal and grapple with that risk? So, Chris, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly leaving the practice of law after having spent $100,000 on my degree and still paying back my loan was a risk. And if I look back on my career, I took a lot of risks that if I were more conservative and thinking about it, I maybe wouldn't have taken. But I actually didn't think about it that way. So in retrospect, every time I've taken what turned out to be a pretty big risk, it's paid off, but I never thought about it that way. I just viewed it as an opportunity, and I'm sort of a leap then look person, and I did that a bunch of times. Just made that leap literally over a lunch to go be in the tech business. And similarly, coming to Vista was somewhat of a risk. We have almost the same career. I don't know how we haven't had this conversation before. But I was a GM of a business at Thompson. After the first business, we grew from 0 to $250 million in 7 years. Sold it to Providence Equity for $1.1 billion, and then I was like, well, now what? And so I spent 2 years at Thomson Reuters as well. And I had actually, it was pretty. I mean, you can work there forever, and you can have a pension. It's a great company, by the way.
Good training ground.
Yeah. But I had made a pitch for an investment to the investment committee, and I said I needed $5 million to return 100. Yeah. And they said, we appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit, Chris, but we just need you to slow down, which no one has ever said to me ever in my entire career. So I literally went back to my office and I put my head on my desk, literally on the wood. And while my forehead was on the desk, the phone rang, and it was a Vista recruiter. It's a true story. And he said,
was Betty.
I'm not kidding. No, it was Leonard. It was Leonard. And he said, I'm calling for the CEO gig. I know it's really short notice. We're down to finalists. You don't know me, but can you come to Austin tomorrow? I'm like, yep.
I love it.
That's a true story. And
I love it.
I got on a plane.
Our system works, Betty.
Yeah.
You all don't know, Betty is our best executive recruiter at Vista for the last 10 years. She's phenomenal, and she complains about it every day. But only to me. But she is the best at spotting talent, honestly. So if you want to learn how to spot talent, spend some time with Betty. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I just take the risk, right? Like no risk, no reward. And I just take the risk. What could go wrong? Let's
flip a little bit. I want to hit the risk piece in this next one. I'm going to talk about leadership. You're walking into an organization and you're now the CEO, and you may know one person or two people. How do you instill a sense of calm on the one hand, but leadership, and make sure that they know that you're in charge? And why don't you start with that, Teresa, and then Chris, why don't you finish with it?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things you do, and I've been privileged to lead a number of organizations, and so you kind of realize that you do have a style, and you develop it over time. I think the first time you don't really realize that you have an approach to it. What I do is, first and foremost, I get a kind of a lay of the land and understand, kind of respect the evolution of where the company has been. I mean, there are similarities across all software companies, which we know very well. but there are also a lot of nuances of culture, and the culture I think is very, very important in an organization. So I try to lay out kind of what's important to me and what has been successful in the past. One thing that I find, especially in a smaller company, is people have been there a long time and they don't have the vision of what it can be, and they don't have the confidence or the calm to kind of get from point A to point B. They take every ripple a little bit too seriously,
Right.
and they just don't have the foresight to kind of plan ahead. And so I think when you can bring to them that vision of, okay, here's where we're going, here's the path that we're on, here's the goals of the company, and here's how we're going to get there. That is incredibly helpful. I'm also very direct around, this is working, this is not working, and transparent. And that I think is, very, it's very successful. It's a good approach because people then feel like they're part of it.
Right.
I think one thing that you have to do really consistently to build the right culture is build that layer of business acumen across the business. And I think if I see one thing in businesses that is lacking today, and that I worry about, continuing, even with my own children, to kind of drive this for them, is today we're in such a world of specialization and deep expertise, right? That somebody that starts in tech thinks that that's the only place that they can go, or somebody that starts in accounting sees that as the only path to go, and people aren't taking enough risks to learn the broader business. That I worry about that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's my 5th grade son that thinks he needs a private coach to help him be a better catcher, which, by the way, he's average at best. Like, he's never going to play. He doesn't. He doesn't. Why, right?
Right, I got you. I know.
You just get to this level where everybody's just trying to, get the very, very best at this layer. And so what I very consciously do is build that knowledge and make that layer of the organization really work together and learn what's going on. And we do that by spending a lot of time learning about, the broader business, making sure that the guys in tech know what's going on with renewals, know what's going on with NPS, know what's going on with the support department, and if they're running behind. And too often, they just don't have that awareness until you kind of bring it there.
Let's come back and talk a little bit about that fabric and that connective tissue. But, Chris, you have an approach that you've evolved to and say, hey, here's how I think about taking control of an organization. So talk a little bit about that approach and, frankly, how you came up with it.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it was an approach until I did it the 3rd time. So I was like, I think this is my philosophy. I think that, so quite candidly, you were talking earlier about your first leadership job, right? And my first CEO job was that tech company. And I had this view of to be totally honest, the first year, I felt like little girl in the big chair, right? And like someone was gonna come knock on my office and say, that's cute. Right?
Get out.
And so I felt like it was the most important thing for me to do to establish leadership was to establish credibility and really understand the business. And when I took over the data recovery part, I went out to Europe, I went to the clean room labs, show me the hard drive, learn, right? And so the first thing I think in any organization that you need to do to get the trust, which is you have to have, is to get credibility. And so what I do and what I did in the last business, what I've started doing every time is my very first day in the CEO job, I sit in tech support and just listen to calls all day long. Single best way to learn what's going on in the business. In fact, I discovered in this business my first day that we had a problem with our infrastructure because a support person in hour 1 clicked go on a report and it just spun. So 6 minutes in, I hit mute on her phone. I'm like, does it always do this?
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, I filibuster. I'm like, okay, where is the tech? Let's find it. But what I've discovered is, go be with every part of the business. I meet with every single employee in my first week. I actually lost my voice the first week. Meet with every single employee, and you can do that in a 300-person organization, maybe not a billion-dollar organization, and really learn what's going on. And then the second thing I do is I have a town hall my first day or first week and talk about what's my philosophy. And I've discovered and developed over time, my philosophy of leadership internally and externally is 3 things: transparency, accountability, and velocity. And so I put it on the screen and I say, this is what matters to me, this is what you will get from me, and this is what I expect from you, and I can't fix anything I don't know about, and I say it all the time. And so they could put it on a t-shirt. And then to your point, Teresa, the other thing I say, which I think is why both of us in grew up seeing all parts of the business, I say to everyone, act like an owner, act like an owner. So they could be a staff accountant I'm like, act like an owner. If you see something, push in the chair. If you see the whiteboard needs washing, if you think that the invoice is bad, act like an owner.
Right.
And I feel like that really does work.
Give us a little more granularity on velocity. You know, obviously transparency, accountability, I think we get a good sense for that, but talk about velocity.
Yeah, I think I'm, blessing and a curse, I think I'm probably one of the most impatient people in the world. And when I see what something should be, I just want to be there, right? And so I try to think about how in an organization can we systematically create accountability to move quickly, right? You look at incentive plans, you look at the way that you hold people accountable, and then you have to model that behavior, right? I have a rule, I will respond to 100% of my emails within 24 hours. And so if I am doing it, you should be, if I can do it, you can do it. And so I think it's that expectation about we move quickly. We have a bias for action. Of course, we want to have as much information as possible, but we as a company will not churn in analysis. We will get as much information as we can. We'll apply a little intuition. There was a good HBR article about that. I mean, a Columbia article about that.
There we go. HBR, are they still in business?
I can't remember what that acronym stands for. But just that you model it, right? You expect it, you require it. You know, people, they know if they get the second email from me, they're going to get help. Right. So it's just modeling that.
Teresa, talk about the connective tissue of informing your senior management team about what else is happening in the business. How do you do that? Talk about the actual blocking and tackling of getting that done, because I agree with you. It's important that you have an informed organization, so you're moving in lockstep, so you can actually have some real velocity as opposed to people moving in different vectors and different dimensions. So
it's critical. I mean, you have to be very, very aligned. Again, because a lot of people now have strong functional expertise, but they didn't have enough awareness or accountability into the overall results. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that the goals are really clear and where we're tracking on those goals. And I make sure that we are very direct and open with each other. So we have a tremendous amount of trust on our team, and I'm very, very protective of who goes on the team. So in the that starts all the way back to the recruiting process. When you're looking at who to hire, you know, and in this company that I'm running now, which is not the first, but you know, we had a few executives that were kind of carryover from when Vista bought the business, and then the rest of the team had to be built out. And so, you know, I brought in a few people that had worked with me before, and then we brought in some people that were new to all of us. And so getting that team dynamic right, I could not overstate the importance. It is critical. Like, a number of people that we recruited were incredibly proficient in their area of expertise, and we didn't hire them. Because they were jerks.
Right. So what are the tools you use? Talk a little bit about the tools.
So,
get granular. Talk about the tools you use and how you...
So reporting, KPIs, what are the, you know, if it's support or something, or professional services, what are the utilization? What were our goals? How are we tracking that? Are there systems in place that measure all of those things? And are we sharing that across the business?
Right.
We also, you know, and that's, you could pick any area, and there's a set of KPIs that we really drive to and talk about across the business. So if any one of us wasn't there, you know, there's a number of people that know enough to ask those questions.
Right.
We also very specifically, when we're driving for a decision on something, I have a very collaborative approach. I will hear from you whether you want to be heard from or not, because I will, you know, basically cold call the team.
How do you do it in the form of a meeting? Or?
Do you do Fist or Five?
No, we don't do.
Oh, does anybody do Fist or Five? We do that. It's so corny, but I love it. I have some of those things. We do that as a leadership team when we're making a really hard decision. I physically make everyone. 5 means I'm all in, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Fist means I'll quit if you make me do it. And then there's some other definitions in between. And when we're making a big decision, like relocating headquarters, which we did last year, like Fist or Five people. And if you're 4, or you have to explain yourself. If you're 3, I'll probably just be like, you're fine. But we do that on every major decision, and I make people physically take, because you can't say later that you didn't get a vote.
You didn't get a vote.
And so that power of alignment. I don't know if you did that too.
Yeah, no, we don't do that, but it's similar, right?
Yeah.
We make sure we hear all of the voices, then I make a decision, and we're done. Like,
Okay, so let's talk. You both are leaders of tech companies, software companies. Neither of you actually, I mean, you grew up in the business in some respects, but you didn't start off writing code for a living. So how do you deal with the product design and product development, and what sort of pushback, or do you get pushback? Tell me a little bit about that. One of the things I hear from executives, well, I've never worked in software. How can I lead a software organization? But yet you two have been two of the most successful executives in the history of software, but you didn't start off as programmers. No, seriously,
Yeah.
right? So talk a little bit about how you lead a product organization.
Yeah, so Chris really talked about it a little bit in the risks you took as you were developing, right? And I think moving functional areas is critically important so that you have a background in the broader business, because leading tech is no different. It's
Right.
just tech is I don't know how you don't lead a tech company today. And I said this earlier. Every company is a tech company these days, because there isn't a business out there that doesn't rely on the technology to deliver the goods and services or whatever it is you're doing to your customers. There's not a single one that I can think of that doesn't rely on tech.
Right.
And so I think if people get too scared of the idea of, I've never led a tech company, I mean, that's, to me, a grave error,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you have to have the humility to learn enough to be dangerous, right? And that's, I think, is key all
Yep.
through your career.
Right.
It's risk, but it's also, there's a lot of humility to it. You have to have a lot of confidence and self-esteem, because you're going to say a lot. I have no idea what you just said. Please explain it to me.
Yeah.
And I did all, for the last 20 years. And so you learn over time, how to ask the right questions. And all of my developers or engineers could now tell you, they're scared of a conversation with me a little bit, because I know enough to be dangerous, and I know when they're bullshitting me.
Right.
And so that's, you need to develop that sense over time. There's no shortcuts.
Chris, you've led a couple of platform transformations and major product rewrites. Talk a bit about how you've done that and how you've managed your team to move through those massive transformations.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of how you learn, you buy the CTO a lot of Diet Mountain Dew,
Yeah.
and then you make them whiteboard for you a lot.
Right, there you go.
We're going to do that again.
Yeah.
But yeah, both companies in the Vista, both companies have run in the Vista portfolio. We've done a pretty major platform transformation, and it starts with fact gathering, right? So there's a theme, which is for me always go get primary data, right? And go sit with the person, go talk to the customers. We did in each of those cases an evaluation. I always feel like every company and every function should do, I call white sheet of paper exercise every year. Like if I were going to do this over and
would
win
be by
in the
design
market,
changes,
what would I
right,
do? What
right.
if I were a competitor
Yeah.
starting to disrupt us?
Right.
What would I do? And then you compare that to what you have, right?
Right.
And should we be rewriting? Should we be building a bridge, et cetera? And there's a lot of strategies around
When
that.
I do that every year, it says
Every
hire
year.
more Bettys, but I only got one. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's being very disciplined about ensuring you have the right data, do a real analysis, and I always say take an unflinching view of the truth, right? What does our product have? What do we need? What's going to sell in the market? What would we do to disrupt? And how do we disrupt ourselves first?
Right.
And sometimes that's an unpopular conversation with investors or the board or even with your management team, but you don't want someone else to eat your lunch, so you're
Right.
far better doing it yourself.
Right.
And so in each of those businesses, we've undertaken, what is really the core element that we need to sell to either retain or sell the clients or get to that next growth phase. As we always want to, if you're 50, you want to be 100. If you're 100, you want to be 350. And what's it really going to take in the market to do that? So you just have to ground yourself outward instead of inward. And I think a lot of execs and businesses get so in love with their own product that they stop asking the external questions about where's the market going, right?
Yep.
What is the next phase of automation? What's the next phase of disruption? And that's the CEO's job. And if you're not asking those questions and then tooling the organization, someone will disrupt you.
Yeah, let's get a little geeky and talk about AI, ML, and the impact on your businesses. I think, Glenn and I were talking earlier that not enough people really understand the impact that artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to have on every industry, and especially ours in the software world. Talk a little bit about how you are inculcating that into your product and your product design and into your companies.
Yeah, I mean, I had the privilege of growing up in a data business, fundamentally, right? So managing email in the context of litigation, there's probably no greater volume, right? Than people writing emails, their present sense impressions of things. And so I got the privilege of growing up with big data challenges as I learned software. So you think about problems differently when you think about any platform software company is sitting on data, and data is the asset. So if you start with that basic understanding of data is the asset, cloud deployment is the enabling technology, and what is the insight that your market needs, right? And if you're the market leader, you have that data.
Got it.
And in our business today, it's super interesting. You might, one might look at our business and think we're doing case management for nonprofits, boy, that's just checking people in at the Y, or that's just doing a little checkbox. But we are sitting on a wealth of data around predictive information about what characteristics and what behaviors and what impacts on an individual can have on a whole population, on a city, on an economy. And so we're starting to think differently about what are those hallmarks of self-sufficiency for an individual, right? And how can we take that data, aggregate it, anonymize it, and give insights back to funders, right? Give insights back to those nonprofits. Tell them about an individual, tell them about a cause in a geography. And so I think that the transforming thought process that everyone should have in any software business is what's the data and what's the insight that you can glean from it.
And how
just
much
think
can you
about that
charge for it so
differently.
that, I got it.
Yeah, $1 billion.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, but so in bringing that sort of thinking into an organization that hadn't experienced it before,
Yeah.
how do you do that? Talk a little bit about how you inculcate the changing dynamic of either new platforms, new technologies into an existing company.
There's excitement to what we're doing, right? There's never been a better time to be in business. I would really say that. The opportunities are tremendous. And so when you get people to join you on that journey, it's easy to sell, quite honestly, right?
Yeah.
So when you can sell a vision, and I do software for global finance organizations, so Office of the CFO, large global enterprises, is what Trintech
And of the
does.
Fortune 500, you have
Over half.
400 and, okay.
Well
all
over
right.
half, yeah.
Big-
So
big
some of
business,
the
yeah.
largest companies in the world use our software for their financial close process. And that sounds really boring, I bet, to a lot of you, but it's not, because we have the most fascinating data. And what that can tell people is not just, how quickly they can close their books, but it also, there's sort of a social underpinning component to it, right? What we do supports the financial markets and the capital markets of the entire world, right? The integrity of the numbers is what is in your retirement plan. It's what in, everybody's, college funding. It's so, so important what we do. So how can we make that better? How can we make our customers smarter, faster, and make finance an area of competitive advantage for a company that has nothing to do with finance, right? How do I make Nike, who's a great customer, how do I make their finance department deliver so much value to the overall entity that they can't imagine not having that information and that insight? And so that's what AL and AI and
At the end of the
ML
day,
do.
tech is cool and it makes your companies cooler. Let's go to a couple questions from the audience. Stand up and shout. Oh, we do have mics. Great, excellent.
Addressing maybe the elephant in the room, you're two women, you're an African-American man. How did that impact how you moved forward in your career and your management style and the challenges?
Good, let's start.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, a lot of mistakes I think women make are to try to be something else, right? And I think that the only way to be successful in your life and in your career is to live authentically and be who you are.
Got it.
And so too many women try to be something else, or too many people try to be like what they think the cookie cutter is supposed to be. And you're going to spend all your time trying to be something that you're not. You won't actually get to be your best self and succeed. And so I am just like, I live to be authentically who I am. So you're going to get that in my business. My management team is going to get that. And I think that's been the realization early, is stop trying to fit, just be yourself. And I think that's been the number one thing for me, is just embrace, I'm going to be who I am. And if an investor doesn't like that, then there's some other investor.
Yeah. I would say it's really key to understand what you bring to the table that's different than others, right? It is easy, and a common thing that they find with women who have been stalled in their careers, that they didn't take enough risk early on. And Chris and I both did a lot of this. Again, we didn't really talk about this before. There was, almost never a time that I wasn't going into a new role every 2 years at most. It got to be a joke where one of my bosses actually gave me some blank business cards and a pencil and just said,
awesome.
I'm sick of printing them, right? Because they changed so much. But I was always willing to take a risk. And the way I would evaluate that is really, there had to be one thing that I was comfortable with, and then something had to be a stretch, right? So it could be the space, it could be the function, right? Like, I knew nothing about marketing and ended up being the VP of marketing. But I knew the space, I knew my customers. It could be, when you move to a new business, right? I knew how to be a CEO. I didn't know anything about what Trintech did as an example. And so having that like rule that you apply as you're evaluating different opportunities, I think is really key.
Yeah, I think those are excellent, because it is about being authentic and being prepared. And I had all of those experiences starting as a chemical engineer and ultimately going back to business school, et cetera. It was being an authentic self. I had the great fortune of having parents who said, you are going to live with integrity, you're going to live with dignity, you're not going to let anyone tell you can't be who you want to be, even though the world didn't necessarily want me to be what I wanted to be. And it's driving through that and taking risks and taking those jobs and stretching and say, all right, can I take on that job? And let me do the hard work. Let me do the more difficult deals. Let me do those sort of things, because it builds a set of skills that also builds confidence. And how I ended up starting Vista, because I know these BWGs didn't hire people that look like me, right? They didn't. You looked at all the private equity world back in 98, 99, 2000, there was one person, Mark McMorris was the only one who was African-American, who worked at a private equity firm of any stature and of any size. So knowing that wasn't an option, and knowing this world of software and technology was going to change everything, you've now got to go out and do your own thing, right? All right, let's go to another question.
So my question is about allocating your budgets to tech development. So I currently work at a financial services firm where we spent $9.5 billion on technology in 2016, which is about 16% of our spend.
Yeah.
So how do you think about allocating your budget towards maintaining current systems and technology and innovating and also disrupting and kind of taking risks and seeing, well, maybe, to your point, something new that we can build, and there will be kind of a new innovation, right? So we're disrupting ourselves and our future competitors. So how do you think about that budget allocation?
Let me start at the Vista level, just to give you a sense. We spend at Vista a little over $2 billion a year in R&D across all of our portfolio companies. So we're about, call it $14.5 billion in revenues, $2 billion in R&D, just to give you that sense. And the way I like to describe it, that's more than Lockheed Martin, and as a percentage of sales, it's more than Amazon, just to give you a sense. Why? Okay, because technology in our world, when I think about it, software is dependent upon two things: product superiority, execution excellence. We can get execution excellence through fantastic executives to run our businesses. Product superiority means these folks need capital to go do that and to lean into ensuring we have the greatest minds and the greatest systems that we can use to develop technology. So why don't you talk specifically about your company?
Yeah, I mean, in our organization, I think a lot of software companies make, and so thinking about it from an innovation rather than an IT point of view, a lot of software companies make the mistake of just having a run rate of expense and thinking incrementalist. So I'm going to spend 14% on R&D, I'm going to do a few incremental things, and they just plot along that way. But we don't think about it that way. We look at each project as a little investment, right? So every single thing that our CTO and VP of product are going to go build, they need to show me exactly what it's going to cost, when we're going to get done, what the payback's going to be, what are we going to get out of it, what's it going to deliver to enterprise value of our company, and if we can't articulate that in a way that's compelling, we'll just spend less.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, there's lots to do, so we've been able to find a lot to do, but it's that discipline around every dollar you spend in the business is an investment. And are you
What's so
spending it wisely?
interesting, about 80% of the companies we look at in buying at Vista don't do that math. It's amazing. I talk. We end up with these little science projects. I mean, well, what is this product for, and what's the benefit of it? And no one knows, because it got started 7 years ago, and the people who started aren't there. They're working on something else. Yeah. It's amazing the lack of discipline that exists in software companies in many cases, which if you bring this level of discipline creates, I shouldn't tell people this, should I? Anyway, brings massive opportunity in terms of as an investor.
Yeah, I would say similar. So I think business as usual is the death of innovation, right? You need to really make sure that you're examining how the money is being spent. It gets easier when you have huge budgets like that, but companies that Vista buys typically don't, right? And something is typically wrong, and that's why they bought it and with a thought to fix it. And so we are critical around every project. What really needs to happen, and is it still the right project for where I need the company to go today? What the customers need tomorrow? We typically start off spending more than we want on maintenance and kind of tech debt, and then that shifts over time. It shifts hopefully very rapidly as we're getting the right talent in the organization and really start driving that innovation. Getting more to artificial intelligence and really moving the needle forward to where our customers absolutely need us to be in the next year, 2 years, because you have to have that vision going forward. But to do that, we really don't look at it as we've got 16% to spend and 12% is on the projects that just kind of have a life of their own.
Yeah, at the Vista level, and you should ask Betty and Renee when they come up next about how we do it. Let me tell you how we do this. We go to our CEOs and we say, what do you need in order to maintain or to capture product superiority? And they come back and say, here's what we need. 99 times out of 100 say, you've got it. Because we know how important that is in this rapidly changing competitive environment in the world of software. It's critical, which is why we support it in the way we do. Another question.
At B-School, we hear a lot about the importance of mentors, and I wanted to hear from each one of you, what's your philosophy on finding the right mentors? So do you look for people that challenge your ideas all the time, or somebody who's your number one supporter? And also, if you guys have ran into any challenges in trying to connect or find a mentor in your career?
Yeah, I find that what I found over time, I didn't know it at the time, again, the most successful mentor-mentee relationships are mutually beneficial. And so if someone just wants to programmatically pick someone and develop them, that will be marginally successful. But my greatest mentor was my greatest advocate was a guy named Ben Allen that I worked for a decade. He was the one that came back after he told me, you don't have an MBA, and said, okay, you can do it, right? And then 10 years we worked together after that. And he taught me so many things about international expansion, and he would take the patience to sit and talk to me. But I made him look good every time. I made him look good in front of the board. I made him look good in front of investors. We did 10 transactions, buy and sell side. And so he was like, I'm going to help her a little more because she's. And so I really feel like they happen almost organically, but cultivate those relationships. And if you are a mentee, think about how you can make that person who's investing in you, how you can make their lives better. How can you serve back what you're learning? Or can you do a little PowerPoint for them for something? Or can you help, whatever it might be. Taught him how to iron his shirt once when we had a deal. Don't ever do that again. I was like, why am I doing this? But have that mutually beneficial relationship. And that for me was what was successful. And so I try to tell that to the people I take on as a mentor, like, I want you to bring things back to me that are going to make the business better. And I will in turn, let's meet periodically and we'll invest in what you're working on.
Right, great point, Teresa.
I would say a lot of my mentors, they've changed over the years, right? I have mentors with regards to specific things a lot of times. I didn't really have probably a 10-year kind of relationship, although I'm still close to a lot of them. But I looked at it more of, okay, I need to learn this, and so who's the right person for me to kind of go learn from?
Totally.
So it was much more specific, but I would agree that it is very mutually beneficial. I try to make sure that I make them look good, because fundamentally that's what they really care about. It really is, right?
Yeah, I think that's my experience as well. It is one of, it's a mutual arrangement and symbiotic in some respects. I would typically, for my I made my mentee or mentors look cool, so that was an important part of what I delivered. No, but a big part of it, honestly, was to lean in and also advance their knowledge, not of the subject you were getting, but their knowledge, in my case, of technology, or in some cases, what was actually moving in a market that they didn't see. And so it's in the morning when they'd show up, yeah, this is what you've asked me to do, but let me tell you some of the insights from this work. And always lean in, and kind of every day. And then they realize they end up relying on you. So I think a big part of that relationship, it has to be mutually beneficial. You have to lean in, and I say you have to earn the right to be a mentee. Okay, you really do. And in my experience at Goldman Sachs and others, that meant, like I say, when your VP showed up on Saturday morning, you were still wearing the same shirt that you were there Friday night in, right? Helping them understand that you were committed to the task. And so you actually earned your way into bigger and broader sets of responsibility. So that's an important dynamic, I thought,
Totally.
In the adoption of mentors, because I adopted a lot of mentors along the way. They didn't necessarily want to be my mentors, but I forced them to be. And then they became completely reliant on me, right? So I think that's a big part of it. Another question.
How do you take as you were talking about, the discipline of sort of what you've learned in the corporate and the structure and the metrics and the benchmarking and numbers, and then bring it and combine a balance with sort of the speed of some of the tech, the scaling that you need to do, the transition that goes on within the tech world of taking, a fast-moving product and growing the company. Love to get your perspectives.
You have thoughts? You want me to go?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead first.
So I'll tell you, as an engineer, I still think of myself as an engineer. My new engineering project is Vista, though. right? if you think about it. And the design points and what we do and how we do it is very much an engineering design around a system applied to private equity in the context of software, right? And it works perfectly well there because none of these BWGs actually do this in this space. So we have a completely, differentiated advantage that is sustainable by our design. Okay, so the point of that is I always look for what I call the arbitrage. What is it that you bring as a paradigm of experience that doesn't exist in another paradigm? Mm-hmm. And if you bring that, what's the value that's created in that context? I know it's a little geeky to think about it that way, but that's how I actually think about it. Because nobody thought about enterprise software, A, as a buyout opportunity, B, doing it in a way where you could do it at scale, and C, bringing a whole set of best practices to these companies. Because the way I like to think about software companies all kind of taste like chicken, right? You got product company, you got product development, you got QA, you got finance, administration. You got 15 functions, and they all kind of act the same way. The only thing that's different is the product and who you're selling it to. So how do we bring a set of best practices to executives to help them run their companies better, right? So that's what I call the paradigm shift. So as an engineer, think about you probably, Six Sigma, triple black belt, all that happy stuff. I will guarantee you there are industries where they have no idea what that means and what the impact of that sort of process control dynamic would have on their outputs. So find those spaces and bring that talent. I don't know if you all have comments.
Yeah, I think it's also about that same approach of engineering, but instrumenting the business, right? So if you try to layer metrics and rigor on, and it's disconnected from the underlying business process, it just becomes noise in the system, right? And so instead, really baking it in to the way that you run the business, so that rigor and accountability and metrics are really top to bottom, from the vision of the organization to how you measure the annual results to an individual person's MBOs to a functional set of accountabilities. It has to be baked into the fabric of how the business runs, and then it's not an afterthought that you're trying to get people to participate in. It is the way that you run the business.
Yeah, I think one part of that a lot of people have a question is, how do I get my voice heard, right? You might have those observations, and how do you get that heard? I think you really have to look in a business where you're dissatisfied or frustrated with the process or the communication channel, and that's really the gap that you need to find a way to address, right? Find the person that's going to be the right mentor to give you a foot in the door in that area, because that's where your idea will be insightful, right? Especially once you're out of school, right? I was able to do a lot of those things as part of my MBA, but you need to be able to get out of your defined box to offer something to the business that they're not seeing.
I'm going to take one more question, then I'm going to go to the lightning round right here.
My question to all of you is, you're both probably more the exception than the rule in tech companies as senior women as CEOs. A lot of these conversations, especially as a woman, a minority woman, first in finance and now in fintech, how can we continue to involve men in these conversations? Because I feel like a lot of these times it's women having these conversations with women, especially in a global environment. How can we continue to be a champion and get more of other parts of the business involved in helping them understand the importance and the impact that women can have in sort of like growing to that 35% number, right? Displaying things like that. How can we continue to have that happen? Thank you.
Companies that drive an inclusive culture win. Their performance is better. And so I will tell you that in a purely capitalistic society, those companies will rise to the top, and the ones that don't get it, no mandate, no quota is going to help that. They're going to just fail. So, you have to look for the businesses that are either women-run or inclusive. I actually don't think they have to be women-run. I love that we run businesses, and I love that our representation across the Vista portfolio is actually very strong. But more importantly, you want to make sure that your executive teams and that your business overall is inclusive and hearing the voice, because that's the voice of the customer. We are all global businesses today, and so we need to make sure that that culture is winning.
Yeah. And I think the pace of inclusion and diversity in leadership and technology is one, it's going to continue to go in the proper direction, I firmly believe, right? And it's just a question of how do you accelerate that pace. And if you think about any barriers, in any part of the economy, that what breaks them down is people's individual experiences, right? And so I always tell the guys that work for me are now executive men who've worked for a woman. So it's their job to get the I'm a Feminist t-shirt on. Thanks, Obama. And if you guys didn't see that picture, it's really cute. It's their job to help, right? Deliver that message out in the world. Like, you know, it's okay. The teams are better when they're more diverse. When there's diversity of experience, there's diversity of thought, which results in a better outcome. But it is the responsibility, to your point, I think, of men as well as women in the context of gender to really promote that story and help the world understand what the benefits are of those diverse teams.
I would say celebrate them. Okay, you have to realize in my role to private equity, 0.1% of the private equity firms have returns of what these two have delivered in their companies. Celebrate them.
Good job.
What that will do is wake them up to the fact that they need to be more inclusive in what they do. Okay, because yeah, it's capitalistic. They're gonna go to where the money is. I know where the money is, okay? And that's why we're here. And it's an important part of being inclusive about saying, guess what? Our bests look like this. And so if you want your best performance, you need to make sure your best looks like this. That's an important part. Let's go to lightning round really quickly. Man, I feel like a talk show.
I know, it's so fun.
That's cool.
You missed your calling.
Yeah, no, I hope not.
I'm kidding.
Tell me about your best day, tell me about your worst day, and what you did about both.
Oh God, you could have warned us.
I know, that's why it's a lightning round.
All right. Best day. There's a lot of great days. Best day is probably the second time I got named CEO because it was more of a conscious, like, yeah, I'm doing this again, and I rocked it the first time, and I'm
Nice.
going to crush it again.
Yeah.
Worst day is probably one of the darker days in the middle when you're struggling with home-life balance. You know, and there's no shortcuts to that either.
Yeah.
So those are probably the
Okay, Chris.
extreme.
Best day selling my Courage for 7 times.
Woo!
Duh. Winning is fun. Like, those are always the best days. So certainly a lot of great days. Honestly, they're usually around transactions. They can be around a customer win, can be around, we renegotiated a contract, as you know, with a big state.
Big one, yeah.
That was actually
That
the
was a good
hardest
day.
thing I ever did.
Yeah, it was a good day.
But the hardest days are, I always view every transformation in a business as like a pendulum swing, right? And there's some point in the middle where it's really hard and like a bunch of things are broken and you're trying to fix it and you're at the office at midnight and you want to like cry.
Right.
And you just have to remember you're in the middle of the pendulum swing. Yeah. Like, don't judge the story in the middle. And so we've had a few of those days in each transformation, but you just keep pushing.
Awesome.